Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Canard Boulevard. Today we're going to answer a question that I get fairly often. Is the Cozy or a Canard a good first airplane for a new pilot? Coming up. Yes, the Cozy is a docile airplane. It's easy to fly. It has really good flying characteristics. The fact that it can't stall is a huge safety point. So why wouldn't you want to use one of these as your primary trainer when you're first learning to fly? Well, let's talk about that. Yes, it's docile. Yes, it is easy to fly, but there are some caveats. The Cozy and the Long Easy and other Canards are very fast airplanes. They cruise at 165 plus knots. As a comparison, let's look at a trainer like I did my initial training in a Cessna 152. A Cessna 152, the stall speed is 35 knots. This airplane stalls at 63. Well, it doesn't stall, but it basically, the Canard quits flying at 63. But 35 to 63, that's a significant difference. Cruise in a 152 is 110 knots, and this one anywhere from 165 to 180 knots. Things happen a lot faster. And given when you're in cruise, you aren't actually doing a whole lot. You're just sitting there and watching the ground go past. So that's okay that maybe your airplane's going faster because you have more time to get ahead of the airplane. All right, then let's talk about approach or in the pattern work. In your 152, you're going to be at 55 knots, where in this airplane, you're going to be at 90 knots. That's not quite twice the speed, but it's getting pretty close. And when you're just learning to fly an airplane for the first time, you're getting all kinds of information and new tasks and things that are being thrown at you that you've never done before, and it is so easy to get task saturated. Now, if you add on top of that a time constraint where you're speeding around the pattern at 90 knots and you're still trying to figure out, am I at the correct altitude? And meanwhile, your base turn's coming up and you're still back on crosswind, at least in your head. That's not a good thing. So while it's not impossible for this to be your first airplane, because of the speeds involved and how fast things happen, it probably is not a great choice for that first airplane. That might mean just renting airplanes with an instructor to get yourself to a point where you are comfortable in the pattern, you are comfortable with approach procedures, you are comfortable talking on the radio and leveling off at altitude and performing a turn and switching tanks, all this stuff all at the same time without getting 5 miles behind the airplane. And when your airplane is doing 170 knots instead of 110, it's easy to get behind an airplane if there's a lot going on. So that's the first thing, speed. It is a fast airplane, probably not great because of that. So what if you just ignored that and you got an instructor and you went up and you got comfortable with the speed of this airplane, and then you decided, okay, I'm ready to do my solo. You go up and you've done your solo. How about that practical test? Can you do your practical test in this airplane? And the answer is no, you cannot. So I've gone through the practical test standards for a private pilot certificate and gone through the different tasks that are a part of that practical test standard. Normal, crosswind, takeoff, climb, approach, landing. Yep, you can do that in this airplane or any other airplane. Forward to slip to landing. People ask if you can slip a Canard. Absolutely you can. I do it all the time. Go around, of course, you can go around in any airplane, and you should go around if your approach is not going well. Steep turns, 100%, you can do steep turns in this. Ground reference maneuvers, yep, you can do those. Navigation, obviously. Slow flight, yeah, you can slow it down into slow flight. It's not going to be the same as in a conventional airplane where you get that high deck angle and it's just kind of climbing along and you might have the throttle up and it's just hanging on the prop in slow flight. You can get the Canard up that high, but if you start pushing power in, it's going to climb. And so I'm going to say 50-50 on that you could perform what they expect as slow flight in this airplane. Basic instrument maneuvers all day long. You can do that, assuming you have correct instrumentation. Emergency operations, sure. Engine failures, fires, all that stuff, that doesn't change. All that stuff is pretty much the same. Obviously, every airplane is a little bit different, and you have to refer to the POH or the checklist for those emergency procedures specific to that airplane. So what is emergency procedures in this airplane is not going to be the same in your 172, for instance. But the emergency procedures are there, and they're going to want to see you perform those emergency procedures primarily engine failure and safe landing from an engine failure. Okay, now we get into the items on the practical test standards that this airplane cannot do. Soft field takeoff, climb, approach, landing. You are not going to do soft field operations with this airplane at all. You will dig in the nose gear. The wheels are small. You'll foul the pants. The nose gear is not strong enough to handle that kind of thing. You won't get it off the ground because you need to get this airplane to accelerate to a speed that the Canard starts to fly so that it lifts off and gets the main wing to fly. If you are on a soft field, you're going to have so much drag that you're likely never going to get to that speed. You will never get the Canard to lift off. And if you do, you're going to need a soft field that's miles long. On a conventional airplane, you can pull the yoke back into your lap, and then the prop wash over the elevators is going to push the tail down and take load off the nose wheel, and that's how you're going to do your soft field landing, is keeping that nose wheel out of the soft field. And of course, you then have an exaggerated angle of attack, and you can get the airplane off in a shorter amount of time. Absolutely cannot do that in this airplane. You can't pull the yoke back or the stick back and expect that the nose is going to rise, because there is no prop wash because the prop's at the back. So soft field operation is completely non-starter with this airplane. That's a practical test standard you cannot do. Short field takeoff, climb, approach, landing. Exact same thing. For a short field in a conventional airplane, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to have maybe a notch of flaps, which this airplane does not have. And you are going to have the yoke back in your lap, and you're going to get that airplane up to speed and pull it off as fast as you can. Again, you're not going to horse this airplane off the ground. You can't do it. You have to get the airspeed up to a point where the Canard starts to fly, and then it lifts off. Every takeoff I do in this airplane, I'm doing a short field takeoff, but it takes as long as it takes. So essentially, a short field takeoff and a regular takeoff are exactly the same in this airplane. There is no short takeoff procedure in the POH for this airplane. Power on stalls, not going to happen. You can't stall this airplane. It'll go up and it'll nose bob. Maybe they'll take that as a stall demonstration, but what the examiner is going to want to see is an actual power on stall that breaks, that you recover from. That's not going to happen in this airplane, so you're not going to be able to do that. And the same goes for power off stalls. The examiner is going to want to see you do a power off stall, like an approach stall, and he want to see you recover from that stall, which is not going to happen in this airplane because you can't stall it. In fact, there's no stall indication, no stall warning, nothing other than the Canard bobbing a little bit, and that's the only indication that you're approaching stall speed. Other than that, and a faster descent rate. And before we go any further, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe to my Canard Boulevard channel, this channel. Just click on that button down below. It really helps me out when you do that. I really need to get the subscriber count up on my channel, and doing that will really help me put out a lot more great videos for you. Thanks for doing that. Spin awareness, 50-50. You can maybe explain this is how a spin occurs, and here's what I would do to prevent it. If it did occur, here's how I would recover. But you are not going to do anything in this airplane that comes anything close to being able to spin it because you can't stall it. And I will mention this direct quote out of the practical test standards for the private pilot exam. The applicant recognizes and recovers promptly after a fully developed stall occurs. So how do you do a fully developed stall in this airplane? Well, you don't. It's not possible. So the fact that that is a requirement spelled out in the practical test standard says that you cannot meet that requirement flying this airplane. Therefore, you cannot pass your private check ride in this airplane. And if you can't do your private check ride in this airplane, then why are you going to do all your training in this airplane and getting familiar with this airplane and you can't do the exam in it? So what you're going to want to do is rent a plane, rent a Cessna, whatever a simple trainer is, do your training in that airplane. Then you want to do your exam in that same airplane that you're familiar with. Once you've done that, then go hog wild. Build or buy yourself a Cozy or a Long Easy, and then you can go flying to your heart's delight. Yeah, that's terrible advice. Don't do that. Get some experience first. Do some cross countries. Maybe get some experience flying a complex airplane or a high performance airplane or something that's fast. At the very least, if you are going to go right into one of these airplanes, get a CFI who's familiar with a Canard, how they fly, what the differences are, and can really help you transition into flying a faster, high-performance, retractable airplane such as this one. Other reasons why you may not want this to be your first early training aircraft, I mentioned speed. It is sensitive in pitch. So at cruise speeds particularly, the faster your airspeed, the more sensitive the pitch gets. And part of your training is going to be holding altitude. How well can you hold altitude? And in the practical test standards, I think it's plus minus 100 feet for private. Don't quote me on that. That's going from a very vague memory. But if you need to hold an altitude, and because your airplanes do 160 knots and you look away at an instrument for a few seconds, and without noticing, the plane starts to diverge a little bit, and all of a sudden you're 150 feet off altitude without even noticing it. It's fast, it's sensitive in pitch, and if it does start diverging off your altitude, it happens really quickly, and you can gain or lose 100 feet just like that. So pitch sensitivity is definitely an issue. Crosswind limitations. This is not a good airplane if you are anywhere where you are going to be limited by crosswinds. I will do 20-25 knot crosswind in a Cessna all day long. You can come in crabbed, you can even land at crabbed. I mean, those things are indestructible. Don't do that, but you can. This airplane, you have to be a lot more careful with crosswinds. Demonstrated crosswind for this airplane is 15 knots for takeoff, 20 knots for landing. And that means if you had a 90-degree crosswind, the most you'd want to see is 15 knots on your takeoff roll. If it's not quite 90 degrees, then you have that crosswind component. You have to do the calculation to figure out what the crosswind component is. And the reason for that is because it is a fully cast-ray nose wheel, and you have these giant sails of these vertical stabilizers on the back, and it will blow you on the runway. And the only thing you can really do if you have not yet reached the speed for rudder authority is use braking. And now if you're braking, now it's extending your takeoff run, and so it really is limited in terms of crosswind. And that is a limitation of this airplane that has hit me a couple times. If you saw my video where I got stuck up in Canada because of weather, I was up in Barrie for a wedding and I ended up having to take a rental car home. That was because they had a 25 gust 35 crosswind, 90 degrees on that runway. Never mind that we had low ceilings below minimums with embedded thunderstorms. On top of that, we had a crosswind on the only runway that was exceeding the crosswind capability of my airplane. So it was a non-starter. I could not leave. I was stuck there, had to drive home with a rental car. That is a limitation of this airplane, and it is a little bit tricky in crosswinds, whereas most of the Cessnas, you point it more or less down the runway, it's going to go where you want it to. This one takes a little more finesse. You have to be able to know where you can come off the braking and transition to rudder control when the rudders become effective in order to counter against the tailwind, or the crosswind rather. And there's some techniques where you start on one side of the runway and kind of do an arc across because it's going to, it's going to blow you across. So there are some techniques there that are different for this airplane. Landing gear. It has retractable landing gear. You are going to forget the landing gear. If you are doing primary training and you're task saturated and you're trying to figure out why did I just overshoot my final turn, and I'm also 300 feet low and the power's wrong, I forgot the carb heat, and oops, landing gear. Yeah, don't forget your landing gear. And I guarantee anyone that is going to do initial training in a retract is in significant danger of landing with your gear up. Bad thing, don't do it. Not just this airplane, any airplane that's a retractable, really, in my view, is not suitable as a primary trainer. And not only that, good luck finding an insurer that will insure you on a retractable gear airplane as a primary trainer before you even have your private certificate. That's probably not going to happen. No flaps. You need to learn how to use flaps. Flaps are a big thing about flying airplanes. They're used for soft field takeoffs. They're used to change your approach angle and speed and angle of attack for approaches. They're used to speed up. They're used to generate extra lift. They're used to help add drag. I mean, flaps have so many different uses, and you need to learn about what those uses are. And every airplane's a little bit different. For instance, I flew my father's Piper Cherokee, and you could fly a soft field takeoff. You'd have that full power stick in your belly, and no flaps, or maybe 1 notch of flaps until you got up to a certain speed, and then you could jerk the flap handle up, pop the airplane up off the ground because of a sudden addition of lift, and then maybe down to second notch of flaps, accelerating ground effect, and then as you're climbing away, you got positive rates, start slowly bringing the flaps in. So that kind of stuff, you're not going to learn if your airplane doesn't have flaps. And I highly suggest you learn on an airplane that has flaps, because every other airplane you're ever going to fly has flaps. This one does not. And I've explained why in the Canard aerodynamics video. I go into a lot of this in a lot more depth in that video, which you can see up here. Lastly, this airplane lands fast. As a result, you need accurate landings. You need to be able to say, there's the spot on the runway I'm going to land. And you need to hit that spot, because runways are not infinite. Unless you're landing at an international airport and they got 8,000 foot runways, then by all means. But most airports are not going to have long, long runways. Here we have 3,500 feet. That's enough for this plane. But I wouldn't want to be doing that if I was just learning it. And we have one runway here that's 2,700 feet, and that's pushing it a bit for this plane. And on that runway, I make sure my approach is perfect, and I'm going to land right at the end of the runway, because I want to use all of that runway. Because braking, we do not have huge wheels in here on this airplane, which means we have small brakes, which means we have limited braking ability. If you land and touch down at 80 knots, you are going to run out of brakes. Your brakes are going to fade, and you're going to have no brakes by the time you get to the end of the runway, and you won't be stopped, or you will be almost stopped. You need to have very good speed control, and you need to be accurate at spot landing, and neither of those things you're going to have when you're just learning to fly. And yes, it lands fast. I touched down at 70 knots in this, unlike the 35 knots in your Cessna 152. Again, things happen much faster. And if you are floating down the runway, your 152, you're floating at 35 knots, not so bad. You're not covering you're not eating up a lot of runway as you float. This airplane, you're floating down the runway at 70 knots, you're eating up a ton of runway every second that goes by. So you can't afford to come in high and fast and float down the runway and hope that you're going to get touched down at a point that you still have enough runway remaining that you're going to be able to brake and come to a stop. That's not something you want to be doing learning as a new pilot. All right, I hope I haven't totally turned you off this airplane. It is a fantastic airplane. But that said, I'm a commercial multi-engine instrument-rated pilot. I've been flying for 30 years. It took me some time to get used to this. The first couple of times I flew this airplane, it was intimidating. Things happen fast. Landing, takeoff, totally different than anything I've ever experienced before. So yeah, it was not something I would want to try at the same time as I was trying to learn how to fly in the first place. But like I said, get some experience under your belt, especially with retractable, complex, high-speed aircraft. Get yourself a good CFI, and you will be safe in one of these airplanes. You'll be able to fly it safely, stall-free, and go places at speeds you can never dream about in a 172. I fly from Cleveland to Florida nonstop in 3.5 hours. You're not doing that in a 172. So there are significant advantages. Just don't be in a hurry to get there. I hope this video is of some help to some of you out there. I know I've got this question quite a few times, so hopefully that answers it for you. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, corrections especially, please leave them in the comments section below. Like this video if you found it at all useful, and please click on the subscribe button for my channel. Really trying to pump up the subscriber numbers, and that really helps me out when you do that. You do that right now, just right down there, that button right there, that subscribe button, just click it. Go on, click it. That's it. You know you want to. All right. Thanks for watching.